To date, the comic strip Calvin and Hobbes has sold more than 50 million books and appeared in thousands of newspapers worldwide. Curious, yet if you walk into a toy store or browse a streaming service, you won't find a single official Hobbes plush toy, graphic tee, or animated television special. The creator, Bill Watterson, actively blocked every licensing deal that crossed his desk, walking away from an estimated $300 to $400 million in revenue. Watterson spent years fighting to ensure those products never existed, making Calvin and Hobbes the center of the most expensive philosophical war in the medium's history. Watterson grew up in the quiet suburbs of Chagrin Falls, Ohio, where he spent his time isolated with a drawing pad, obsessing over classic newspaper strips like Pogo, Crazy Cat, and especially Peanuts. In 4th grade, he wrote a fan letter to Peanuts creator Charles Schulz. To his surprise, Schulz actually wrote back. That single piece of mail cemented Watterson's ambition. He would draw comics for a living. But the actual industry proved brutal. Shortly after graduating college, Watterson landed a trial job drawing political cartoons for the Cincinnati Post, only to be fired a few months later for failing to meet their standards. Needing a steady paycheck, he took a job designing advertisements for local car dealerships and grocery stores, work he absolutely detested. Designing grocery layouts convinced him that cartooning shouldn't be a vehicle for sales. He decided that if he ever got his own strip, the art would exist solely to express his own thoughts. In November 1985, after years of rejection, Watterson's creation, Calvin and Hobbes, finally hit the papers. Readers immediately embraced it. The appeal relied on a specific narrative mechanic. Hobbes is an inanimate stuffed tiger whenever adults are in the panel, but a walking, talking, deeply philosophical companion when he is alone with Calvin. Universal Press Syndicate saw this popularity and immediately pressured Watterson to approve coffee mugs, calendars, and toys. The commercial pressure scaled all the way to Hollywood, culminating in serious interest from directors like Steven Spielberg to adapt the strip into film. Watterson refused all of it. He saw licensing as a direct threat to the specific psychological mechanics that made his comic work. Producing a Hobbes doll meant making a choice: manufacture a literal stuffed animal or a bipedal tiger. Compressing a character into merchandise would forcefully answer the central question of the strip, breaking the illusion of whether he was real. Watterson held his ground, but his initial contract legally granted Universal Press Syndicate the rights to exploit the characters however they saw fit. Because they owned those rights, the syndicate tried to force a compromise. Watterson refused to budge an inch, triggering an emotionally exhausting legal war that consumed several years of his life. The fight transformed Watterson into an uncompromising combatant, determined to protect his characters from becoming another one-dimensional logo on a shelf. By 1991, the constant battles had taken their toll. Watterson was creatively drained and ready to quit the industry entirely. He told his publishers that if they did not return full legal control of the characters to him, he would walk away from the strip forever. Universal Press Syndicate faced a choice. Unlike other properties that could be passed off to a team of assistants, the value of Calvin and Hobbes was inextricably tied to Watterson's specific voice. They were forced to concede. The syndicate rewrote the contract. Watterson finally secured total control over his work, taking a hard-earned 9-month sabbatical before returning to the strip. By showing a willingness to quit his life's work rather than compromise it, a single artist managed to defeat the corporate structure that distributed his art. Watterson permanently abandoned hundreds of millions of dollars in personal wealth to ensure that his characters never became cheap pitchmen for plastic trinkets. He instead used that protected space to turn a children's medium into a platform for deep philosophical debate, naming his characters after John Calvin and Thomas Hobbes. By combining these dense academic references with a protagonist who could sound like a lit grad one day and a manic child the next, he proved that a comic strip could dominate through narrative merit alone. Watterson's victory ensured that Calvin and Hobbes never had to function as a billboard. On November 9, 1995, newspaper editors received a short, startling letter. Bill Watterson announced he was stopping Calvin and Hobbes at the end of the year. He was walking away from the most popular comic in the world while it was still at its peak. To understand that decision, you have to look at the industry he was leaving. In the 80s and 90s, comics were a mass-market juggernaut, squeezed together on packed newsstands and delivered to millions of doorsteps every morning. But that scale came with suffocating physical constraints. Syndicates forced cartoonists into rigid, inflexible grids, so their work could be squashed into whatever small pocket of space a local editor had left on the page. This created the throwaway panel. Because local papers often chopped off the top tier of a Sunday strip to save space, cartoonists had to waste a full third of their canvas on disposable jokes that wouldn't ruin the main story if they were deleted. Watterson hated this. He argued that squeezing art into these tiny, predictable boxes prevented real character development and simplified the storytelling until the humor became repetitive. After reaching a breaking point, Watterson took a sabbatical in 1991. When he returned, he issued an ultimatum. He required an unbreakable half-page layout. Editors could either print the comic exactly as he drew it or not at all. Most newspapers chose to keep the strip. The syndicate conceded, giving Watterson the first total layout freedom in modern comics. Shattering the grid was a prerequisite for everything that followed. By reclaiming the physical canvas, Watterson gained the room necessary to change how the medium functioned. We can actually measure the results of that win. By analyzing the data across all 14,712 panels published during the strip's 10-year run, a distinct evolution emerges. This chart tracks the structures Watterson used. Right after his 1991 sabbatical, the use of standard gridded layouts plummeted. At the same time, alternative structures surged. He began using borderless panels and complex scenes inside larger frames to control the story's pace. The storytelling mechanics changed too. As the canvas opened up, the total volume of words decreased. Wordless frames became more frequent, shifting the narrative burden from dialogue to cinematic imagery. Visually, the standard line art was replaced by sweeping, complex watercolor landscapes that took full advantage of the larger half-page format. By redesigning the physical dimensions of the strip, Watterson changed the way information was transferred to the reader. Once Watterson secured this visual independence, what did he actually use it to say? The names of his characters provided the first clue. He named the duo after the 16th century theologian John Calvin and the 17th century political philosopher Thomas Hobbes. Watterson used the boy's imagination to explore the concept of the absurd hero. Calvin regularly pushes back against the rigid expectations of school and parents, using play to create his own meaning in a structured world. This often led to moments of existential reflection. The characters would sit under a massive night sky and realize that, against the cosmos, a human life is effectively a dust speck. But Watterson balanced that insignificance with a drive to live fully. Because nothing lasts forever, he found every reason to go exploring. Watterson showed that a daily strip could serve as a platform for satire and social critique, using a child's perspective to question the world as directly as an academic text. By 1995, Watterson felt he had explored the medium as far as he could. He had won the battle for space and used it to discuss complex ideas, and he was ready to work at a more thoughtful pace. He also refused to let his work degrade into a zombie strip, those comics that continue for decades under ghostwriters and assistants, long after the original creator has left. He ended the story with a celebration of the imagination. In his final strip on December 31st, 1995, the characters sled down a hill into a blank, snow-covered landscape. That final image left the characters frozen in time, preserved in their childhood, without ever having to age or change to fit a market. Even as the strip remained in rotation across 2,000 newspapers worldwide, Watterson moved into a private life in Ohio, focusing on landscape painting and staying out of the public eye. Then, after 28 years of silence, he returned in 2023 with a new collaborative project called The Mysteries. It was nothing like the world of Calvin. The new book is a bleak, gothic fable for adults, illustrated in shades of gray with a somber tone. Watterson's legacy is defined by his choice to leave the party early. By ending the strip while it was still evolving, he ensured his work would never become repetitive.